Alright, so I had a little camera trouble, but since I came talked to you last, I did rig this thing. It's almost completely done. Did it the same way I always do them. A couple of things I'll point out um, that are really nice on this particular model. And I'll show you how I do the landing gear. So I saved something to rig so that we can do that later so you can see. But you can see that it rigs pretty nice with that elastic rigging. And my super glue. So a couple weird things. This thing here is an actual piece of paper that I made larger with a little bit of glue on either side, make it three-dimensional. The kit has, for instance, it's nice, has little spots where you put all the rigging. I mean, exactly where you put it. The landing gear is put together just like the interplane struts, with a slight difference. That piece is a piece of aluminum tubing for the axle. That subwing went together really, really well. Nice airfoil. And the difference between the landing gear and the interplane is you took one piece, in my case brass, and I folded it or bent it just exactly like this. There's a little straight edge up there. But just following that pattern, the fit was absolutely exceptional. And it went perfectly. And then I followed this in that I made the subwing, put it down into the gear at those two spots. Didn't glue it, but just put them down there, and then glued the gear up and under the fuselage in my pre-drilled holes. And it just worked spectacularly well. And then that's where we're going to have to do a little rigging, and I will show you that later, just to be complete. It's all pretty much the same. Now I had to make wheels, so what I do is I use their little circles, and I get the right diameter, and I make it a little larger, probably, I don't know, 32nd of an inch, 60th of an inch larger all the way around, because then what I'm going to do is, of course, chuck this into a Dremel and sand it and shape it. So you pop those out, and then you add those to your Dremel tool. You make sure it spins nice and straight, and then I set it on a low speed, and I take my sanding block and I start to shape the outside edge. And depending on how big it is, you check it once in a while to make sure you get the right diameter, but you just sort of sand this around and turn it into a curve that you think it's supposed to be, what it's supposed to look like from the side. Then I take some heavier sandpaper and I take it and kind of make an edge on it, and then I start to form what will be the interior and what will be where the tire actually starts. So you can just take a little bit of sandpaper. I suppose you could use a tool of some kind too, but the sandpaper seems to work fine for me. Make a hard edge and just push, and you can see it works just like a lathe, and you can see you start to delineate what that will end up looking like. I do the underside as well, a little bit of light sanding, and then you check it every once in a while, make sure it's the right diameter, and when it's good, you're completed. Looks good. Now, the cone parts here, where everything was cut out, the parts that cover the spokes, and this little piece here is going to be bent, so I'm bending it with furrowing it with the backside of a blade as usual, and you just kind of fold that down like so, and then you put these together and you'll glue it just like that. Now you notice there's a little bit of white there, so take an appropriate piece of color. Again, in my case, I've used markers usually. This one actually bled a little bit. I probably should have used some paint, but anyway, it still's going to look okay. So I put a little bit of color on there so that won't show through. Another thing to try, and a little bit on the other side, would be to sand this edge a little bit so that it's thinner, and you might not get a step on it at all. It might look really, really good. I didn't do that on this one, but that might be something to do in the future. Put a little glue on that triangular tab, fold it together, and it pretty automatically sort of makes the correct conical shape. And you can also pre-form it a little bit. I didn't bother this time to pre-form. And I use my little fingers there, well, my fat, ugly fingers, as a way to squeeze the paper together and get that glue to set. Works really, really well. And there is a spoke covering. Now you notice on this one, didn't quite match it up. So it's not a big deal. you can take it and sand that little edge a little bit rounder and make it come together. Anything that breaks up in terms of the paper, or you leave a white line somewhere, you can hit it again with a little marker or some paint. I also sanded down that seam just a tiny bit, and that little bit I knocked off on the covering either will stay there as a piece of weathering, or I can touch it up later. That's not a huge problem. I'm just squeezing, making sure it's nice and solid and straight and kind of smashed down, kind of almost like burnishing it. Then you put a little glue around the edge, and then we're just going to set this right on top of the wheels. Now notice the wheels have been primed, sanded a little bit, and then painted with a very dark gray to simulate where the tires are going to go. And then you just pop this down, making sure that you have a hole where the axle is going to go. And make sure it's lined up, making sure you have an even tire all the way around, which is important. And it actually looks really, really good. Make sure it's snugged in there, and there's a wheel. Do the very same thing to the other side. Then the back side, put a little glue on, too much glue, and you just, and this is the easy part because it's on the back and it's flat in this particular set of wheels. So you just put this on the other side. Again, the only important thing is to have an even tire left over, and to make sure you have a potential hole for the axle. So you just kind of slide this around before it dries, and when you get it right, push it a little bit, and there you have a wheel. Looks good. Very good. Now I went in with my little round file, and kind of opened up those holes and evened them out, because that's where they're going to feed onto the axle in a couple minutes. But there's a front and a back of the wheels, and they look really good. Now one thing I do usually is flatten one edge. That's because it makes it look like the airplane has a little heft. It sort of, I don't know, it sort of plants it on your display case as opposed to having it kind of float above. So I like to do that. Make a flat edge on each. Don't have to, but that's something I do on plastic models and paper models. And then I took a little super glue, dabbed it on the aluminum tube axle, the 1/16 tubing, and just popped the wheel. And then my cinematography here again is lacking, but you make sure that flat end matches up so that when you set it down, it's going to be in line with the tail skid and make sense where that flat piece is, so it'll actually lay down and touch the table. But here it is, starting to really look good. Oh, man, it's so close. It needs rigging. It needs another little piece, one little tiny piece on the wheels. It needs a windshield, and of course it needs a propeller. But it is so close. We'll definitely finish it this weekend. Really been an overall super fun build, and really has the stance and the look of a Camel.